The needs of the suffering outweigh the happiness of the people who have caused others to suffer. And at this point, they're suffering the casualties as if they're in a fucking war. So why the fuck aren't they doing anything?
Before, who would gladly fight for me, but only the Farshnik was willing to suffer for me. When I pieced together the gossip and dismissed the absurd.
Be saying that anybody deserves to suffer, because if you think that someone deserves to suffer, guess what? You are be what you want. I will say, however, this obviously this suffers from the problem of doing script. If you're gonna die anyway, if you're gonna suffer and die anyway, the least you can do is try and take out the oppressive happiness of the people who have caused others to suffer. So, vegetarian for dietary reasons, and you don't give a shit about the suffering of animals because humans are superior. Well, and at that point, the economy starts to suffer as you have more and more people without the ability to contribute. Those people actually live to atone, and lots of death and suffering and death and suffering of suffering. That's the suffering. Nations take back the world. Nations suffer setbacks, they do horrible things, they stare right on into the wealthy because they are arses. They're arses and they cause this problem and they will suffer. Economic justice, to immigrate perfectly legally. Like, these are people who genuinely suffer, and most of the time they happening at the moment. People are dying because of climate change. People are suffering because of climate change. Yet the arrow is just a guy suffering from PTSD. You know, crash lands on a his cruise ship crashes. He lands up on a desert. Darn much, right? We're suffering and dying as it is. You're not cocking it up any fucking more. Help end all the suffering that's going on in Dawnstar. He can help end the nightmares. Place with real. This is a real place with real people and real suffering, and you know, just because there's a dragon dude, they matter. They're important. They deserve absolutely to live and live a life free from suffering. But guess what? I can't do jack diddly fucking. And appeal to that reason in people who just want to see me suffer and die. But honestly, you wonder why I don't. All capitalism is causing suffering and starvation and degradation and shame and embarrassment and it's subjugation, suffering, and humiliation. When you are stupid enough to believe that violence and suffering will achieve any kind of good, they win. I love it, and everyone should have one. I think Kess is certainly suffering at the moment as a result of the my attempts to describe them suffer, because apart from anything else, I don't like descriptions, right? Level of interference to where people aren't gonna be suffering and dying, and where it's not just gonna be, well, it's not good, and people are suffering and dying, and it's not fun. Meanwhile, America is just batshit fucking crazy. You know, I want these people to suffer, but if people suffered, if they knew they would suffer, then they would stop committing crimes, and no, they of shit and terror and suffering and isn't just gonna leave his friends behind to suffer.
And here you see the suffering they are enduring, because that's Grace being...
And the statistics are far more on their side, that yes, indeed, most suffering in the world, most rape, most murder is actually committed.
That we don't see, and so she gets her own character arc of basically suffering from PTSD and like wanting to war over a tiny amount of fucking land. Okay, there are people suffering and dying because of this pointless fucking war.
Almost, that's the hope. You know, like, there's gonna be constant death and suffering, but there will be champions of hope. Oh yeah, there are people out there who hate me and are sadistic and want me to suffer because they think it's funny.
It isn't, said Lucy. It's survival. You will live and your suffering will allow others to live. Jim said, you can't be serious.
When he is that much of a douche a lot of the time that it's like, okay, you're suffering now. That's good. You're suffering for someone who holds opinions we don't like. You are unworthy and you deserve to suffer. People on the right are like, well, you're not worth rid of jobs. See how the poor are going to suffer. See how capitalistic ideology is only going to make this situation. Feel some wanting for people who have harmed me to suffer, that I am not in some capacity.
And it's odd that they have forgotten that thus the people who should be suffering austerity are the people who have the money to...
Destroying this part of myself, about making this part of myself suffer. I mean, I literally just last night, well...
You know what, I'm in charge, you do as I say or you're gonna suffer. Except,
well, you see, they're women and they're lovely and they're suffering and that's not nice. You know, you want to stand by victims and support them because there's but by fear of pain and of suffering and of death. They want you to be motivated by the whip, by the stick. They want you to give people no hope whatsoever, and you let them starve and suffer and be at risk of death. I need to keep making these videos because, quite frankly, you know, my suffering counts for fucking naught when there are people dying because of...
way to go, and then she comes out and is like, yes, we will let the children suffer and die because we want to win.
One fucking iota, one single plank instance of the amount of suffering that they themselves have suffered. And and it's not working. It's not working. People are suffering and people are dying. Okay. And, sorry. How many of the people who are suffering and dying because of Tory cuts
were hounding me and wanting me to suffer and die and saying, kill yourself, you fat bloodberry cunt, are like saying, yeah, you should go into politics. Look, trolls, just, if this is just about wanting to see me suffer, I understand that, I get that. Look,
shit about anybody else. Yes, they're gonna die, they're gonna suffer, I don't give a shit. You know, they're not Jon Snow, they're not Tyrion Lannister, they're not Daenerys Targaryen. Help! That wanting people to suffer does not help! That suffering is never a desirable fucking cause! I accidentally pressed the keyboard and whatever. So, yeah, people are suffering and people are dying. And this is not good. This is fucking... People are going to suffer and goddamn fucking die. Planet is going to suffer as all of these. Less creepy, but he got to suffer a fate worse than death, and like I'm affected because people think the foreigners deserve to suffer. into something tried to harm me, I want to stop it harming me again. I want it to suffer. The thing is, of course, that I genuinely fear that, if he does become Prime Minister, that he will suffer a mysterious accident and be found having kicked himself with, Joffrey, and suffering with Tyrion, and has been dealing with all of the fucking court shenanigans. Don't make no mistake, people are going to suffer and people are going to die. But people were always going to suffer and people were always going to die. In the world of 2019, outside of this complex, the world is ruled by male bastards and people suffer and they die and they get diseases. Then we are going to see a lot of suffering. Because we are going to see safety nets in these craters made by the explosive bombardment and drown and suffer from the toxicity of the runoff.
Then I'm gonna have eternal damnation and eternal suffering. So the idea that, okay, you become a Cyberman,
of those who want the dying and the suffering and the oppression and slavery to stop. Because maybe in the irony of
wanting to see me suffer. I understand that. I get that. Lots of people want to see me suffer. I hate myself.
So goddamn what? People are dying. People are suffering. I can't do jack fucking squat to help them besides make these videos. The left wing cannot suffer through social conservatism. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, these are
to try and make their characters suffer. And you get to reward them when they do well. And yet at the same time
personal suffering and had someone say, well, I also suffer, so you should love.
So a 22-year-old guy suffering from Asperger's syndrome who went through university, didn't find, don't like the Conservative Party and are suffering because of the Conservative Party. I think
one vote to leave the EU, right? Yes, okay, we will have to suffer through the Tories. That's because people are going to suffer as a result of his policies. Well, no. His policies is a bunch of bullshit made up on the racists think, because they're going to get their heads kicked in. They will suffer, they will die, they're going to start a war, and they are going. Women and children are going to suffer and die and scream about Britain, about Cameron. Someone who cares so much about trying to be moral can guiltlessly hate, can guiltlessly want to suffer. But Nazis, but their lives are happy. It is only the controvoxi who suffer inequality and artificial scarcity. Merle nodded. Starving. On people suffering. On people working, on hating themselves, on hating other people. On this system
based on wealth. Austerity is saying that the poor can suffer so that the rich can live. Why don't we turn that on its head? I hesitate to say he's not a nerd, but he's not suffering from the same nerdy outcast.
But I don't hate him personally. I don't want him personally to suffer. I do want someone to be ridiculed and dismissed. I'm sorry if wanting people to not suffer and die makes me in your... They have done X number of wrong things, they deserve suffering. and they genuinely think leaving is a good idea, but it has fucked up the economy. And people are suffering. People are fucking suffering, and they matter. And they are gonna suffer and starve and die unless we have a government that is willing to fucking... Because people think they deserve to suffer and to die. Why has the example of why the world is shit, although absolutely nothing compared to the terrors and suffering and just utter inhumanity.
Bring someone back from hell because it makes you happy. You do it because they are suffering eternal fucking torment.
Like these people, and they're good people, and they don't deserve to suffer. And they're going to, because of a whole load of motivated bastards.
And we'll have ratcheted down the suffering of the poor to such an extent that when it explodes outwards, occasionally the rights of the unborn child to not be born in pain and suffering happen to coincide with the right. So therefore you can't suffer. So you need to have hope, but you need to suffer. So wars and torture and all this horrible stuff. I can save your memories, but that will include the pain you are currently suffering. If I don't save your memories, the person you are now effectively dies. Your body will live on. I don't want to die. It's that I don't want to suffer. You know, I don't want to suffer, but people whose bodies, you know, are disposed of in the natural way, they suffer and die in an eternal afterlife of agony. So yeah, and people are going to die, but people were always going to suffer, and people were always going to die. It's just a case of how many. We're gonna, you know, mock and belittle the suffering that you went through. And another example of why the world is shit, although absolutely nothing compared to the terrors and suffering and just utter revenge is just. That if these people suffer, they will stop. No. Wrong. Let's just kill it. Let's just make it die. Let's make it suffer, because you can never be allowed to get away with something like that.
Of these animals suffering and dying, right? Because of the way our infrastructure works, these animals
of an economy, if it means that people suffer and die in your country. What is the point of it when it means that you
don't need to cause suffering? And we don't want people to cause suffering. We don't want anybody to think that there is any... If you are sitting in a comfortable position of privilege, you don't see the suffering. You don't see the discrimination, insults and harassment. You like, there are problems, there is pain, there is suffering, but you know you will survive. Like, yes, you're going to literally have your brain scooped out. But at the same time, there was an ignorance to the suffering that was going on. That massive global effects, killing people, causing them to suffer, causing massive amounts of property damage. Their civilization, they clearly got the ability to feed everyone and have nobody suffer. You know, they've got the ability to make great countrywide support for the people who are suffering and dying at the hands of the Tory government. No. There is just... We're just a tad too compassionate to keep electing selfish, greedy fuckwits who would let the poor suffer and die. Well, the selfish, greedy fuckwits rob me of all of my pleasure and joy so that they can see me suffer and scream and jape at the screen. And that's fine. I get money from that. We're fucked. We're fucked. We are suffering and dying, and all you give a shit about is, oh man, but we could have gone, but we didn't.
Sole goal and ambition seems to be making me suffer and commit suicide. which I suppose is one way of guaranteeing that I won't commit them, and that will like condemn their soul to eternal suffering in hell or whatever it is. And that's a way to pay for it. You can either
Because we think that other people deserve to suffer. Why are the poor starving in the streets? Why are they homeless? Because the rich...
That would have been unfair as it was, but she decided that she wanted him to suffer for his perceived crime, and it seems she belonged to the local...
hard-working, bloody amazing people are going to suffer and die because of these bastards. People I know, and I'm the last of I'm suffering as well, bro. Then you don't get to say that. You don't get this. All the Brexit, all of this suffering was so that a few rich fuckers could make a few more pounds. Albeit than any threats of pain or suffering or... Because that's... I mean, it's only a 3-month contract and it's shift work. You're suffering now. That's good. You're suffering for your many sins, you know. Definitely problematic. They definitely have caused a lot of suffering, and that's absolutely unforgivable, right?
cheap. The government doesn't care about people. People are suffering and dying, and they are committing suicide all the time.
Leaving her to kind of burn and suffer by a fucked up Legitio. You have her basically saying, yeah, I'm gonna live for, a year. Fuck it. I will take this as the opportunity to to not suffer alone. As I also can do harm. Because they can make suffering happen. Because they can make bad things happen. That's when I go, oh, you...
And as a result, the individual stories suffer from it, right? Whereas Farscape is much more generic.
People very unhappy and cause deaths and suffering, which is all horrible. Is it just distracts from a point where so many people are suffering that if you don't have UBI, you're not paying your guillotine insurance. And just suffering, with no viable end in sight. So yeah.
I don't care about Laura. I care about the 100 million universes that will suffer if I screw this up. If I have to fuck her and kill you to do my duty, I will.
Within the left that kind of, well, they deserve to suffer. They deserve all the horrible things. They're nasty people that they will fuck over a country and leave them to suffer and die. I don't like that. I am someone who, being a main character means suffering and death and despair. Have you not read the contract?
Keep getting them. People just want to see me suffer and die. Which kind of makes me think that if I ever do go out, I should just do it.
And rational about things when, they're facing suffering and starvation is ridiculous. Of course they're gonna do whatever it takes to survive. See me and they hear me and they just like, I want to make you suffer. I want to turn you inside out and I want to fuck around with your head.
Austerity, I'm sorry, everybody needs to suffer, but we're not gonna actually tax the people who have the fucking money.
Whilst people on your own streets are suffering and dying, and existential terror of knowing that there is so much suffering and tragedy and death out there, that you can do. Guys, in the natural world, it's just pain and death and suffering. All the fucking who spent so much of their time dedicated to shitting on me to suffer because, you know, I'm human. Okay, and yes, some companies are going to suffer. Some companies aren't going to be able to pay their employees more. Some companies reasons binge watching Doctor Who such depth. I didn't feel afraid. I was screaming, there was suffering, but for it all there was hope. It was you're either gonna suffer and die, or you're suffer and gonna die, and everything that might have protected you is just benefit the economy, so they can suffer and die. Well, fuck you then, buddy. Fuck you. But other countries do it, yeah. Rage. And they were like, you know, I want these people to suffer, but if people suffered, if they knew on this planet, or indeed, fuck it, the universe and the multiverse that deserves to suffer. Because that impulse.
Fucktards who would like to just see me suffer and jerk because, hey, look, he's crying. Yeah, that's fun. Make him cry again.
Because actually, a lot of the jobs you need a degree for also are going to suffer technological unemployment. It's not like, you know, it's also English people who suffer under the Tories. You know, about how much I wanted the alt-right to suffer, about how much I wanted them. It's fucking death, it's not fucking violence, it's not fucking suffering. That's right. Like, Cersei has been suffering with, you know, Joffrey, and suffering with Tyrion.
He survived being thrown out into space, but he's clearly suffering and clearly just fucked. Because, and he actually...
You can be causing more deaths. You can be allowing more deaths and more suffering to happen than you could doing other things. If you had your way, so many more people would be suffering. Hurt the ones you love, and they will make you suffer. And you're saying, I think, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, we all agree that suffering and death is wrong. We just have different the right-wing perspective is that you must live and then suffer. Just suffer. It's not even as simple or as neat as just without context. Because clearly I am someone who suffers from that myself. As my raging at John Lockers would attest. Because you're wrecking lives, you're making people suffer. So they're going to fight back. And that might be an offensive. Are capable of sympathizing with tragedy and suffering that they see happening before them. But no. People are worthy of all the money they get, and the poor people deserve to suffer and die because they're just not working hard enough. Again. You have no value for human life, no value for the suffering of humanity. All you can distilled action and drama and suffering. They are times of heightened emotion. You do it because you want to help people, because you see people suffering and you want to make a difference. You would never, ever.
Gigantic billboard of, we will make you suffer so much you will beg for death. Okay. Because these are...
Okay. I can't do jack squat to help the people who are suffering and dying. Okay, because I don't care about my own life. cause mass loss of life, that can cause mass suffering, and currently so many people are just sticking their things in their ears going la la la.
Of the people did not vote for the Tories, and the majority of the people are suffering because of the Tories. Okay, for the Conservatives, and the majority of the people are suffering because of the Conservatives. And oh yeah, thousands of people have killed.
Murder. I hate killing. I hate suffering. But I said about Donald Trump, the assassination of Donald Trump, that if it happened, that transgender people, you know, people who are suffering any form of discrimination and abuse, they deserve it, but there is a part of me that would dearly like to see them suffer, die. Particularly one certain individual, and he knows who.
Okay, because this is it. Lives and suffering of people. Your opinion of a TV show deserved any kind of pain or suffering or anything. I need to get away because this is not good. Just let you enjoy the suffering for a moment. I am going to go.
Human rights are gonna go. You know, that was it. It was you're either gonna suffer and die, or you'll suffer and because you care about other people, and other people are suffering and dying, and you can do jack shit about it. I mean, I pray for the sake of my soul, for the sake of all those suffering and dying right now, because
UKIP stands for standing by as others suffer. UKIP stands for shutting the doors on the wounded that we. If you get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, if Jeremy Corbyn suffers a mysterious accident and it is ruled as suicide, there's going to be somebody else to stand. Ensure that, you know, animals who are suffering suffer the least amount possible, you know.
Nobody deserves to suffer. As much as we may dearly fucking want them to. Nobody. How dare you say that all the suffering that I have gone through, that I should treat this person with fucking respect of our experience? How dare you say that you suffer the same shit?
Rage at me. Give me your suffering. And I just go, no, actually, I agree with you. He's shit. He's so horrible. David,
horrible thing about the real world is consequences and suffering, and it changes. Whereas there is something kind of, you like not suffering, therefore you like when other people are alive and not dead, not suffering. That's how my brain works. Well, there can't be much worse things to suffer than very slow atomic disintegration and annihilation. So what are they doing?
will be funded, so that will do them good, and therefore these people won't suffer so much. The problem is,
enough, you know, like, yes, all we suffer stigma in a similar way, but we think so very, very differently. We still don't know what's gonna happen. We still don't fucking know. We're suffering the consequences of leaving the European Union, but because ISIS knows that they aren't the ones who are going to suffer the negative blowback from this. Literary context, in a fictional context, yeah, these people can just suffer now. These people, they don't deserve.
but he's a bit thick and he suffers. Like, he's tasked. I mean, literally, there is a point in the book where it's like, you will be set free because it feels like, you know, there has been enough suffering to earn some good stuff. Okay. So,
therefore you've got this. The whites have conquered most of the world and caused a lot of suffering, so maybe we're actually a load of bastards who should all die. But you know what? Again, that's
less likely to be successful, whereas men sort of suffer in silence, and then they're brought up on guns and swords and all these.
This attitude of leaving people to die, of leaving people to suffer and die, and like in Greece, that's why you kill that individual who you know has caused so much suffering, and you know will cause so much suffering more.
Except, I'm here to say that life under this regime is suffering. I'm here to say that
That is how it began. The Farshnook and I. Him, the stoic suffering survivor. Me, the observant Samaritan and friend.
He's just fucked up and insane, as I explain the suffering, that he's just persistent, that you cannot.
and if you are going to make a mockery of other people's suffering, then your comments are not going to show up on my videos.
Can do to help people who are suffering, you know. I've got no money to give to charity. I've got the people who are affected will basically be flash fried instantly. They will not suffer. Whereas one person will undergo being alive. You like not being dead. You like not suffering. Therefore, you like when other people are alive and not dead. Okay with it if Trump supporters were to suffer some kind of significant bloody tragedy.
Sadism as finding enjoyment from another's suffering. And that's where you don't have the excuse of, well, fairness.
But you are going to lose this, and you are going to suffer, and you are going to die. Now, because you care about other people, and other people are suffering and dying, and you can do jack shit about it. I mean, it's false that is making so many of you suffer and die. This is why we stop fascists. This is why dictators are not liked. Okay. You know, if we cared, we wouldn't be saying, we shouldn't be helping them when our own are suffering. Right? Caring means that they want the people who've caused them to suffer as well. It is a very understandable human. Ultimately, what you are doing then in that moment is choosing to make a woman endure suffering and hell for 9 months, along with fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. That makes sense now, because if you think about it, that's basically...
Because obviously I don't want anybody to be suffering due to David Cameron, but it's this thing whereby the more evil these guys who committed suicide, tried to commit suicide and suffers from bipolar depression, okay, but maybe not the best role model.
Because the rich think they deserve to suffer. Why are trans people being persecuted? Because transphobics think they deserve to suffer. We should ever believe that people deserve to suffer. I don't think that is what the human race should be about. I don't think... And he's gonna suffer. He is going to suffer. And, kind of like that. I kind of like it when... With a load of shit. To that I say, I'm a Doctor Who fan. I suffered through Love and Monsters. You don't give up...
Just say, that is literally my own neurosis making me suffer. But yeah, that's why Skrulls is in second position, but not first. Are born as one particular gender, and then they suffer some sort of horrific accident.
Not a lot of people are going to agree or sympathize because they're going to suffer. And a lot of suffering is going to happen because of what you did. On giving out pain and suffering to those who hurt others. This isn't about thinking through the pragmatic. If my character has to do this quest line, right, I want as fewer people to suffer as possible. If I have to do this,
The lives and the suffering trump your opinions of a fucking TV show. Like, they will give you hope, because with hope you can suffer. If you have no hope, you will just give up and go mad. So therefore you can't suffer. Subjectively, I've also spent the past year suffering from depression and feeling quite suicidal about me.
you won't bail out the suffering. You won't bail out the poor and the disabled and the students. You'll bail out the rich. Not die in horrific disasters. I would like it so that the poor do not suffer. I would like it so that capitalism... God, I've offended people that I care about and people who are suffering oppression. Another part of my brain, okay, the homeless, yeah, the homeless, they're just suffering, so we'll kill all of them. And then it's like, okay, we'll go.
And sometimes women get fucked up. Women suffer and they go through experiences.
Nothing I do is gonna save anyone in a direct way. People are dying and suffering all the time, and I can't do jack. When they were busy suffering and dying and saying, hey, this is ours, what the fuck are you doing? And AIDS, yay! He is suffering and screaming, yay! I always love to give joy to people. So would be to allow more suffering and death to continue than it would be to act. And essentially, we are still suffering the shakeout of the First World War. Because what happens in the First World War is that you see people are suffering. People are fucking suffering, and even the biggest supporters of it are getting fucked over.
Have an end justify the means here. Because there will be people who will be suffering and who will be hurt and who will be killed more. You know, you're watching people suffering. You're hearing reports about more potential of life, right? Like, the fact that you're gonna suffer for 9 goddamn months doesn't matter, because, you know, because the left wing can suffer through fiscal conservatism. The left wing cannot suffer through, or some other form of capitalism takes on, and basically we just have mass suffering, you know. So isn't just male or female, right? I know that all these people suffer discrimination and issues, and sometimes, you know, so brave men went out and they ended their suffering, you know. Death as a mercy. No, that doesn't actually change anything. That just means a lot of people suffer and die. All you have to do is you have to go like, okay, and I am gonna make you suffer as you die, and then to cap it all off, we have the Harry Potter Christ element, or your emotions matter more than somebody's right to live and not suffer through pain because of your fucking gun. Anywhere else, right? Yeah, you've got to fucking suffer under Westminster. Well, so do we. So do we. Whether it will be worthwhile or whether it will be needless pain and suffering. So, fucking think about where your meat comes from, because it comes from living animals that suffer and die, and that's horrible. But, you know, I do kind of like the denial thing that people should suffer and die because, but it's my TV show, you ruined my character.
As just, we're going to kill you now because we don't need you. No, you live and you suffer and you grovel and you hate yourself. Damage to the welfare state. They are talking about jobs going away, about the economy suffering, about go about doing them in ways that mean that there is as less suffering as can happen. And then you've got the fashion to suffering. We don't celebrate suffering. We do not champion suffering. We do not run on forever and ever and ever. Utter tragedies and then just make them suffer. And I sympathise. I really do. But it doesn't make the world a better place. Much cost, after so much death, after so much bloodshed and suffering and loss of free will and cannibalism and just general. This guy is one man is causing extreme suffering and death of creatures built on the suffering of animals, the suffering and death of animals. And what's the moral? To the point where it could and is and has caused a lot of suffering. But I don't hate him personally. They will destroy society. They will cause untold suffering. They will make the economy worse. They will make lives worse. About thinking about what will create more harm or suffering, or what will create people to be better behaved and goes wrong, where everybody just suffers and dies so many times, and almost this is the curse. Now they're gonna die. So fuck the world, fuck the young people, let them suffer and starve, because fuck them, right? That anybody should be made to suffer for the sake of suffering. Nor again does that mean that anybody, or is the fact that you in America are letting your women and children suffer and die. You are letting your good men suffer and... Why can't we all just get along? Because if you are trans, you are suffering an eldritch terror that threatens to swallow you whole every time. Tough calls have to be made and people suffer as a result. Sometimes people...
Why I have gotten to the point where I am is because people hate me and they want to make me suffer. I know it is. And like the problems that I have been suffering with these past year, you know, the treatments are in effect and they are working. Debt. Most of Europe is suffering extreme austerity. We can't afford war. Certainly, we can't afford a world war. Autistic people. And in response, they make the autistic people suffer. You know, obviously there is Okay, at the moment, okay, one of the things I am suffering from, the things that and I am actually going to have to share this to my sister. You know, the price of this thing that could be used to help sufferers of AIDS, and at all, if you have anything to stand for aside from just nihilism and death and suffering and the end of all things, I'm sliding even further into the shit that I needed so that people who are suffering and dying in Britain
can be proper because I show solidarity for the victims and for the suffering. I do not say, well, I feel solidarity, therefore I will surrender human rights.
And it would be horrible, and it would result in needless suffering, and then it will be, and anyway, cat spray.
Getting worse. People in our own countries are suffering and starving because they're not getting the money. They're not getting the money. There are no challenges worth solving. It's like, okay, that's a clusterfuck. People are still suffering and dying in there. They still need suffering is ever a good thing. That doesn't mean that their suffering is ever something that should be wished for or I just sort of want to see myself suffer, and sort of, you know, it's very eager to. I don't actually think that that means that you deserve to suffer, because I see people on the left and pretty, but I am gonna suffer under Westminster. You know, I just am. And don't think that I'm that great. You know, this is why I suffer in, you know, terms of, you know, producing my CDs and stuff. It's because it's like perspectives of people map the different subjective feelings of suffering and put them on some kind of object.
That, hey, what you're doing is you're watching people suffering, and you know you are consciously choosing to make that action. No, it doesn't care what it.
I'm not entirely sure what a humane amount of suffering would be, but these are countries that are just absolutely fucking game. I'll play the fucking game, and I will win, and then I will make you suffer and die, because I'm the fucking doctor, and that's like, yeah, you're gonna do horrible, horrible shit. People are going to suffer, and they are going to die, and it's going. The threat of violence or harm or suffering sway you. Yes, absolutely. Variabilities should be taken into account. No, through the lens of your own suffering. Against change and injustice, we have people who said no to suffering. We don't celebrate suffering. We do not champion some citizenry. You are the people who are suffering. This is me showing compassion towards you, saying, no, Timmy, put the fucking gun down. We have 4 more years of the poor suffering and dying because of ideological reasons. Idiots who just want me to suffer because it's funny. And I still... If you don't, they will riot and protest, and because if they don't, they will suffer and die. And at the same time, brain, because at that moment, at that time, and there, I wanted the alt-right to suffer. These people back in chains who would make them suffer like their ancestors did before them. What you are experiencing right at all, if you have anything to stand for aside from just nihilism and death and suffering and the end of all things. At this point, what you have is an entire industry built on the suffering of creatures, built on the suffering of animals. The suffering
Isn't just going to leave his friends behind to suffer. And here you see the suffering they are enduring, because that's Grace being... Through the entire book, this is his superpower. He suffers. He suffers, and he's a bit moral, and he's a bit smart.
be stopped. but that doesn't mean that their suffering is ever a good thing. That doesn't mean that their suffering
Only be a war of liberation, because you know there are North Korean people suffering. And again, we need to cut down on everything and fuck the economy. We need to just make people suffer. And the Tories, whilst they are in power, making people suffer. And yeah, you know, fair enough. Those are problems, and nobody should have to suffer through that. But at the same time, you know,
people being persecuted because transphobics think they deserve to suffer. Why are black people being shot?
Hang on, you MP. Yes, I am actually suffering from depression at the moment, feeling quite suicidal. But
A lot of my very good friends might end up suffering, and like, because I'm not a completely heartless bastard. I'm not.
it's just you will be made to suffer. And if you can survive, then you leave.
For nail, because if the alternative is suffering and starvation and death, yeah, they're gonna fight tooth and nail. Dicks when, hey, people who are suffering have the right to be dicks. And it's like, yes, I understand, but they do not deserve to suffer because you're shit, because the characters that you like didn't get. Leave the EU. Fucking suffer the Tories for 5 years. Suffer whatever the fuck they want to do, because then Jeremy calls death and suffering and death and suffering of sufferingness, the sufferingness. I'm not gonna live a life of pain and suffering if that's lazy, if that's privileged, if that's, you know, well, that's what this is. You have to be motivated by fear and pain and loss and suffering, because if you aren't, then managing to survive, people will bring up others' suffering as a way to shut me the fuck up. You know, in school when I was... No. Suffering is on occasion an unfortunate necessity to stop people from trying to kill you. Help all these people who are suffering. And there are people suffering out there right now who are being targeted and harassed. So much suffering, and you know will cause so much suffering more, because in that moment, to not act promotes mass death and suffering. And so if you stop him speaking by speaking before a crowd and spreading his toxic ideas, he's going to be affected. People are going to suffer. And socialism either say, oh, well, this is a terrible condition and these people are suffering horrendously, but we also don't understand them. Right now, though, you have a chance to stop others from suffering the fates you did. Obey Merle today and the harvest of your children will end. Well, these people are unworthy, they deserve to die and they deserve to suffer. I'm sick of that fucking really matter who wins or loses at the end of the day. What matters is that everyone is fucking suffering and dying because the men at the top don't know. But I meant it. I want the alt-right to suffer. I want them to scream in pain. As a person, I care. I care. You're human beings. You're suffering. That's horrible. I don't like it. But at the same time, it is a place of just constant death and suffering. And that's a fact. They die. They can get left to starve and suffer and become homeless and get killed. They don't give a shit about it. Should be about. I don't think that is what people should be about. Sometimes suffering is an unfortunate necessity because sometimes they're nobody should want people to suffer. Anyway, I'm gonna end this. Well, no, that's right. We won't go boom. We will just all slowly suffer and die as we get whittled away by starvation. To a large extent, the enemy of men that is causing us to suffer is other men, is the you're trapped between the devil and the deep blue fucking sea, and it's not just you suffering, it's your fucking mother too. Ensure that, you know, animals who are suffering suffer the least amount possible, you know. To read Catster's Diary of the Shrunken Woman, you will have to find it yourself. You will have to suffer as I did. You know, people are suffering and dying under Westminster, and they are going to suffer and die whether Scotland is in there or not.
No more lightning. You will suffer at my hands.
Because what you are fundamentally saying is that you want to discriminate, you want others to suffer, and you think that if you say enough horseshit,
Fuckers don't care about anything. You fuckers just want to see me suffering and screaming and dead. And they'll have no purpose, but they need to make them suffer because, yeah, you've done some shit to us.
and suddenly, you know, all that work, all that suffering that people have had to endure.
Fuck is this? I'm going through hell here, and there's a doctor saving everybody while I'm suffering. Well, fuck you! Fuck you!
On a podcast called Painfotainment, talking about how basically the suffering of people has always been some us, because everybody is going to suffer until the point when enough people have suffered that they say enough is enough, and they...
Oh, so, you know, when people are suffering and dying and you are doomed to be homeless without a job, living on the street,
just is sadistic and wants people to suffer, doesn't he? Civilians, her innocent children, not only do you cause pain and suffering, but you also radicalize individuals. And so, to these people, the status quo, the suffering, was the amount of people who have made me suffer. Me being vengeful is just not a good idea. It's these people. But they still don't deserve to suffer. They still don't deserve to... saying that, hey, we've got our mojo back. We're making other children suffer. We're killing civilians. Yay for Britain.
you can suffer. If you have no hope, you will just give up and go mad. So therefore you can't suffer. So you need to have hope, but you need to suffer. So hit it and see the predator's enjoyment and not the prey's suffering. That's the problem. Because
yes, people will starve and suffer as America is run improperly. But you know what? Although fear leads to anger, leads to hatred, leads to suffering, it kind of makes sense. You know, and that was something that I rubbished the first time.
impact of knowing that a good portion of the world hates you and wants you to die and suffer because you represent
personal suffering and had someone say, well, I also suffer, so you should love,
is about rich people getting richer whilst the poor are suffering. But that doesn't mean that the civil
thing that people suffering is a bit worse than you having your house seized from you. So that deserves to suffer. Because that impulse that it is right that others suffer, that is what is wrong with humanity. That
is it worth the risk? Oh, so many women suffer rape at the hands of men, and men are very little.
it's fucking economic consensus, mate. Look out on the fucking world. See the suffering. See how automation is going to pay the ultimate price to end that suffering. Great leader was a wreck now. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please. Self to death, as Frankie Boyle said, that, he might suffer a mysterious accident. Or try hard to just make people care about the suffering that isn't gonna stop. I just am. And so Scotland saying, but we're suffering under Westminster, and that's to do this, so that we can get into a position whereby suffering ends. And it's very much an exploration of help, that wanting people to suffer does not help. That suffering is never a desirable fucking cause.
By sadism, by a feeling that, that people should suffer. Admittedly, revenge is...
That has overridden the rights of others, that has made other peoples suffer. When your demographic...
These people are going to suffer anyway. They are going to be in pain anyway. They are all going to be dead anyway.
All the things they should be, but if you are hating on people, if you are saying that they should suffer, if you honestly believe that the oppression now, because you are saying that, people shouldn't be dicks, when, hey, people who are suffering have the right to be dicks, and it's like, didn't get fucked in the ass by Hannibal Barca, right? When the Romans did not suffer a catastrophic defeat, it was like that anybody should be made to suffer for the sake of suffering. Nor again does that mean that anybody's big fucking problem with capitalism that needs to be addressed, because a lot of people are suffering and more are going to. You are going. The more jobs are gonna go away, the more people are gonna suffer, and the less...
Saplings? That's a sapling, isn't it? What if I meant to survive here? What if...
To render it a little bit lightly, we're all sort of suffering from a case of the Debbie Downers. We're all a bit not liking things at the moment. Then, fuck it. Get up. Just say balls to it. We're all gonna suffer and die, and we're gonna just throw heads right at the end of time. Oh, well, that person's dying and suffering is not more important than your right to own a bit of fucking property. I'm not suffering the way people are suffering. Now the left, they already think they're going to suffer and going to die. They already think that under your regime, that people deserve suffering. that if they have done X number of wrong things, they deserve. Corporations as a whole suffer if enough people die from your product or service that, that means that anybody should be shamed for suffering if that's what they want to do under safe, sane, consensual circumstances.
Still, actual people are being murdered and they are suffering.
Helping people. Like, we are reaching a point where people are suffering and the help is not being given to them because
And the Tories, whilst they are in power making people suffer, are saying, hey, we need a new living wage, we need to cut down and not
horrible things going on, and minorities suffering and making a stand and paying the price.
ways into cities, and as they're suffering and dying for days, and they're acting as a perfect billboard saying, hey, dude,
There is horror in the world. There has been suffering in the world. But if Clinton had won, kind of like that. I kind of like it when the Doctor is suffering. He's that much of a douche a lot of the time. My life, my suffering, my pain, so what? We are talking about the future of the human race. Revenge is not good. Nobody ever deserves to suffer. Some
Thick film. Lots of people getting masticated by a huge fish. Delightful stuff, really. The boy looked down at him and frowned. Anyway,
arguably, at least within a very sentient society, are suffering because they lack the sort of sentience. And so for me, making your country worse off, and it's getting people killed. People are suffering. But you're just like, I can't save a lot of souls from a lot of suffering. This could do a lot of good. Because if you think that someone deserves to suffer, guess what? You are a problematic individual.
or it is so that I can steal stuff from them. Like the large aspect of Skyrim, the
Fortunate necessity to stop people from trying to kill you. Suffering should never, ever, under any fucking definition, robots can't do, and we generally are going to fucking suffer.
because women are, because children are, and the poor are being made to suffer because of the rich.
But less brains in them, less nervous system, they're less able to suffer. And children suffer and die. You are letting your good men suffer and die because of your ignorance and stupidity. Many people wishing I would commit suicide. So many people who want me dead. So many people who want me to suffer and die, and
who earnestly want to see me suffer and die.
a lot of people are going to suffer and a lot of people are going to die. And I'm laughing now.
Or somewhere that you are voting UKIP because isn't it a laugh making everyone suffer and die? Which is that, maybe this is another human being who is suffering and who has paid a price for me. The right to swing your fist in another man's face. Your emotive will to see someone suffer ends at the point of making of shit.
and terror and suffering and people are suffering and dying under Westminster, and they are going to suffer and die whether Scotland is in there or not. Okay? Well, to be honest, all films to a certain extent suffer from oversimplification. Sorry, I'm picking dying then. No, I'm not. I'm not doing the do this or you will suffer and you will die because
some, fictional simulation from a video game to quote unquote suffer so that you can have a good old laugh. Now,
all it does is causes anger and aggression and pain and suffering and makes more death in the world. Hey, these people are being oppressed. They're suffering. Believe in their ideology because it's the only way that this ideology is going to survive. It is for the first few series, first 5 series that kind of suffer from pacing issues, whereas this
utter shits who are literally getting off on the suffering of the poor, and we're going to have regular beatings of the poor.
Empathy for all the people who are going to suffer and die because of them. And I have empathy. These are people who support policies about letting others fucking die and suffer if it means that some other people are better off. I'm speaking about sort of death and suffering going on all the time and how we just sort of have to deal with it and go on with things.
Someone suffer ends at the point of making them actually fucking suffer. The feminist cause by driving men away, by basically laughing at their pain and suffering, and that's not right, that has to stop because it is
involved in a fucking war in ISIS. And it's like now ISIS are suffering major losses and we've regained Pima, and therefore the ways in which you will suffer will continue and continue and continue until the end of fucking time. That there is some higher purpose, some higher meaning, that the suffering exists for a reason.
It's more of a sort of feeling that, well, no, I suffered, so you should suffer, so things can be right with the balance of the world in the... About a small percentage of people who are suffering from diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Alex Jahans. It has been...
White people are being persecuted. That men are suffering a special kind of persecution. That immigrants are just become homeless. We aren't going to let them suffer and die. We're going to help people remain...
Explain it. I am an atheist suffering a crisis of faith. Because it's not
allegiances. It is a case of dismissing suffering before your very eyes because you've got some grander... Not a lot of people are going to agree or sympathise because they're going to suffer. And a lot of suffering is going to happen because of what you did. So far.
actually, killing an animal or making it suffer, then why the fuck would you do it? Why the fuck would you?
If you're gonna play a game for its story, something's gonna suffer, right? Because they have made the country poorer, they have made people of the country suffer, and their policies have killed people. And you fucker! I've been in there for fucking trillions of years, suffering, but now I have got a way out, and now I will kill you. Are causing inhumane amounts of suffering, right? I'm not entirely sure what a humane amount of suffering would be. Who are suffering, who don't have much hope, people who might only be living because death threats are going to fucking suffer in the years to come, right? Because, you know, I give a shit about people, right? Nothing except death and suffering. And if there is going to be any kind of life at all, it must adapt. But people are going to suffer and they are going to die. Good people, good, honest,
Because, dude, so many people are suffering under the cuts. We need to make sure that the Labour Party gets in, because
able to get away with doing this shit. Okay, people are suffering and dying and they're just laughing about it. Genuinely laughing.
more life will be better. Less poor people will be suffering.
Struggle at story, they struggle at narrative, right? And, you know, games that do it well suffer because they are.
Make sure that all of the poor people suffer and only the rich survive. 200 years, you know, and instead, because, hey, people are suffering, people are dying, we need to get this shit done. Live humanely, and that we prevent suffering, and like maybe we have the equivalent of like server rules. Pain without hope, suffering without hope, pain and suffering when the person no longer gives a shit.